lone rancher who
I'm
couldn't
finishing
read
up
and the
section
mail-order bride who taught
C
him,
now.
letter
Good.
by letter.
I agree. A is
On
definitely the
this
right
vast
choice.
stretch of land lived Samuel, a man who had spent most of his life alone, tending to his ranch. The ranch was large and spread out over rolling hills, with a few weathered wooden fences marking its boundaries. There were cattle grazing in the distance, and a small barn that had seen many years of hard work. Samuel knew every inch of his land, every path the cattle followed, and every fence that needed repair. Yet, despite all his skills, there was a secret he carried deep inside, a secret that had always made him feel small and embarrassed. Samuel could not read. He had grown up in a family that never placed importance on education. His father had died when he was young, and his mother had struggled to make ends meet. Samuel had worked in the field since he could walk, learning the ways of the land, the animals, and the weather. Reading and writing were foreign to him, and over the years he had found ways to survive without them. He could handle money, tend the cattle, repair the fences, and even write simple notes with the help of others. But letters from town or government notices always filled him with dread. When the mail arrived, he would hide it under a pile of hay or leave it on the table, hoping no one would notice that he could not read the words. Life on the ranch was quiet, almost too quiet. Samuel had friends in the nearby town, but he rarely stayed long. Conversations in the town were friendly but distant. People respected him for his hard work, yet they never invited him into their circles of letters, books, or newspapers. Samuel felt a pang of loneliness in those moments, but he brushed it off, thinking that the land was enough company for him. The truth was, the ranch was lonely, and Samuel's heart longed for connection, someone who could share his days and nights, someone who could understand both his strengths and his weaknesses. One evening, as he sat by the fireplace in his small wooden house, Samuel thought about the life he had led. The flames flickered across the walls, casting shadows that danced like memories of the past. He remembered childhood friends he had lost touch with, neighbors who had moved away, and the many nights he had spent staring at the stars, wishing for something more. His hands, rough and calloused from years of work, trembled slightly as he reached for a cup of tea. He wondered if he would always be alone, tending to his land with only the cattle for company. Then his eyes fell on a newspaper he had received a few days ago. It was an old copy, the edges worn and the print faded. But one advertisement caught his attention, a notice from a woman seeking to correspond with a man on a ranch, a mail-order bride. Samuel stared at the words, reading them slowly, as best as he could. The letters were strange to him, yet the idea planted a seed of hope in his heart. He had never thought of marriage seriously. Life on the ranch was too demanding, and he had never met a woman who understood his world. But the thought of companionship, of someone to share meals with, to laugh with, and to talk to, made his chest feel lighter. He set the paper down and stared into the fire, imagining what it would be like to have someone by his side. The loneliness that had been a constant companion for years suddenly felt sharper, and he realized that perhaps it was time to take a chance. The next few days were filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Samuel had never sent letters to strangers before. The act of writing was intimidating, each letter a reminder of his inability to read. He sought help from a trusted friend in town, a kind man who agreed to write the letter for him. Samuel dictated his words carefully, telling the woman about his life, the ranch, and the quiet beauty of the plains. He wrote about the long days and the simple joys, about the satisfaction of a hard day's work and the peace of a quiet evening. He also wrote honestly about his shortcomings, never mentioning that he could not read, for fear it might frighten her away. Weeks passed after the letter was sent. Samuel continued his daily routine, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and maintaining the ranch. Each morning he rose with the sun, and each evening he sat by the fireplace, staring at the horizon, wondering if he would ever hear back. The silence was heavy at times, and he often found himself talking to the cattle as if they were old friends who could understand his thoughts. He imagined what she might be like, her smile, her voice, the way she would move around the house and the ranch. Each imagined detail brought a mixture of hope and nervousness. Finally, a letter arrived. Samuel had never felt his heart race so quickly. The envelope was plain, but it carried a promise of change. He carefully opened it with hands that trembled slightly, trying to make sense of the words inside. Although he could not read them fully, he felt the warmth of the writing, the carefulness with which the woman had composed her message. He sensed kindness, patience, and a willingness to understand. It was Clara, the woman who had responded to his letter. She wrote about herself, her life in the East, and her curiosity about the ranch life she was about to join. Her words were simple yet filled with enthusiasm, and Samuel felt a spark of excitement he had not experienced in years. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Samuel cleaned the house, repaired the barn, and made sure the cattle were in good order. He thought endlessly about what Clara would find when she arrived, about the long journey she would take, and the challenges of adjusting to life on the ranch. There was nervousness in every task he performed, a sense of anticipation that made even the simplest chores feel significant. He also wondered how he would explain his inability to read. The thought of revealing this secret made his stomach twist, yet he knew that honesty would be essential for a relationship built on trust. When the day finally came for Clara to arrive, Samuel waited by the road, his eyes scanning the horizon for the approaching figure. He felt an unusual mix of fear and excitement. The distant dust clouds signaled a wagon approaching, and his heart leapt. As the wagon drew closer, he saw a young woman stepping down with a small bag in her hand. Clara's eyes met his, and for the first time in many years, Samuel felt an overwhelming sense of possibility. She was curious, kind, and full of life. Samuel introduced himself, feeling awkward yet relieved to finally meet the woman who had brought hope into his quiet, solitary life. Their first days together were full of discovery. Samuel showed her the ranch, the cattle, and the simple routines that governed their lives. Clara listened attentively, asking questions and noting details. She quickly noticed Samuel's difficulty with reading and writing, but rather than judging him, she approached it with patience. She understood that life had dealt him challenges, and she admired his strength and resilience. Samuel, in turn, felt a mixture of relief and vulnerability. For the first time, he could be himself without pretense, sharing his struggles with someone who seemed willing to understand. The sun set over the plains, casting long shadows across the ranch. Samuel and Clara sat by the fireplace, talking quietly about their pasts, their hopes, and their dreams. The ranch, once a place of solitude and struggle, began to feel alive with the promise of companionship. Samuel knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be hard work, learning, and adjustments. But for the first time, he felt that he did not have to face it alone. In the flickering light of the fire, he realized that the arrival of Clara was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, growth, and the possibility of love, built slowly, letter by letter. Clara stepped off the wagon and onto the dusty road, her eyes taking in the vastness of Samuel's ranch. The hills stretched endlessly, dotted with grazing cattle and old wooden fences that creaked in the wind. For a moment, she felt both awe and a little fear. She had grown up in a small town on the East Coast, surrounded by people, markets, and schools. This wide-open land with its silence and vast skies was completely new to her. Yet she felt a thrill, an excitement she had never known. She was stepping into a life that was entirely different, full of unknowns and possibilities. Samuel walked beside her, guiding her toward the house. He had cleaned every corner, swept the floor, and arranged the few pieces of furniture as best as he could. The house was simple, modest, and sturdy, just like its owner. As they entered, Clara noticed the warmth of the fire burning in the hearth and the smell of fresh bread on the table. She smiled, feeling welcomed despite the unfamiliar surroundings. Samuel, on the other hand, felt nervous. He had spent years alone, never imagining anyone would come to share this life with him. He wanted everything to be perfect, to show her that he could manage the ranch and provide a home, even though he carried a deep worry inside him, his inability to read. The first days were filled with adjustments and learning for both of them. Clara had never done ranch work before. She learned quickly, observing Samuel as he fed the cattle, repaired fences, and tended the small vegetable garden. At first she struggled with the physical demands, but she refused to give up. She would rise with the sun, hands raw from work, but a smile on her face, determined to understand this new life. Samuel admired her determination and her willingness to learn, even though he did not say it aloud. He noticed her careful attention to detail and how she listened when he spoke, always eager to know more. One morning, as they worked side by side mending a broken fence, Clara noticed Samuel hesitating with a letter he had received from town. His hands trembled slightly as he held it, and he avoided looking directly at the words. Curiosity mixed with gentle concern, Clara asked, "Samuel, do you want me to help you with that?" He paused, caught off guard by her kindness. He had always hidden his inability to read, fearing embarrassment, but something in Clara's eyes made him feel safe. With a hesitant nod, he handed her the letter. She carefully read it aloud, explaining the contents patiently, never rushing him, never making him feel small. From that moment, a new part of their relationship began. Clara realized Samuel could not read, and instead of judging him, she saw it as an opportunity to help. She suggested they start slowly, letter by letter, day by day. Samuel felt a mixture of fear and hope. Learning to read as an adult was intimidating, but he trusted Clara. She was patient, gentle, and encouraging, and that gave him courage he had never felt before. Their lessons began in small ways. Clara used objects from the ranch: an apple, a rope, a bucket, to associate letters with real things. "A is for apple," she would say, holding the fruit in front of him. Samuel would repeat the letter, trying to remember the shape and sound. At first, he stumbled over the letters, mixing them up or forgetting them entirely. But Clara never laughed or showed impatience. She simply encouraged him to try again. "It's okay," she would say softly. "You're learning and every step counts." Slowly, Samuel began to understand the connection between letters, sounds, and words. Their days became filled with these small lessons. After the morning chores, they would sit by the window with a notebook and a piece of charcoal, writing letters and sounding out words. Samuel would practice forming letters carefully, while Clara read aloud sentences from simple stories. At first, it was slow and frustrating. Samuel's hands ached, and his mind grew tired. But Clara's constant support made the effort bearable. She celebrated each small victory, like the first time he correctly wrote his own name, or when he recognized a word without her help. Those moments were small sparks of joy, brightening their long, demanding days on the ranch. Outside of the lessons, their relationship continued to grow. Clara's presence brought warmth to the lonely house, and Samuel found himself talking to her about things he had never shared with anyone. He spoke of his childhood, the hard work he had endured, and the dreams he had quietly kept in his heart. Clara listened attentively, sometimes offering advice, sometimes just nodding in understanding. In return, she shared her own stories from the East Coast, her family, and her hopes for the future. These conversations, simple yet heartfelt, created a bond that neither of them had expected so quickly. Life on the ranch, however, was never easy. Storms swept through the plains without warning, and the work was physically demanding. One afternoon, a sudden thunderstorm forced them to take shelter in the barn. Rain pounded the roof, and wind howled around the building. Clara felt frightened, but Samuel held her hand firmly. He guided her to a safe corner and sat beside her, speaking softly until the fear passed. That evening, as the storm subsided, they lit a small lantern and sat in silence, sharing the quiet after the chaos. Moments like these brought them closer together, teaching them to rely on each other in ways that went beyond reading or work. As the weeks turned into months, Samuel's confidence grew. He began to read simple letters on his own, sounding out each word carefully. The first time he read a short note from Clara without her help, he felt a surge of pride and joy. He held the paper in his hands, his eyes scanning the words he had once thought impossible to understand. Clara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. The progress was slow, but each step mattered. Samuel realized that learning to read was not just about letters on a page. It was about connection, trust, and the belief that he could overcome challenges, no matter how daunting. At night, they would sit by the fire, reading stories together or writing letters to friends in town. Samuel sometimes struggled, but Clara never let him give up. They laughed at mistakes, celebrated victories, and slowly built a routine that blended ranch work with learning. Their bond deepened, not only through shared labor but through shared growth. Samuel's world expanded beyond the ranch as he learned to read, and Clara discovered a strength within herself she had never known, the ability to teach, to encourage, and to love someone through patience and understanding. Clara also found ways to make learning enjoyable. She created small games, like matching letters with objects or writing simple words in the dirt and asking Samuel to trace them. Samuel began to anticipate these lessons, looking forward to the time spent with her, not just for the learning but for the quiet companionship. He realized that learning to read was transforming his life, making the world feel less intimidating and more full of possibilities. Over time, Samuel began to see Clara as more than a teacher. She was his partner, his friend, and the person who had brought warmth, hope, and love into his quiet, lonely life. He admired her courage, her intelligence, and her ability to adapt to the harsh realities of ranch life. Clara, in turn, respected Samuel's strength, his work ethic, and the gentle kindness he showed beneath his rough exterior. Together, they found balance. The ranch needed work, but it also needed heart, and they provided both. The season began to change, and the plains grew warmer. Flowers bloomed near the edges of the ranch, and the cattle were healthy and strong. Samuel and Clara worked side by side, laughing and sharing small victories. The letters, once intimidating and fear-inducing, had become symbols of hope, learning, and connection. Each word Samuel read, each sentence he wrote, was a step toward a future that felt brighter than he had ever imagined. By the end of the year, Samuel could read letters with ease, though he still stumbled occasionally over difficult words. He had learned more than just letters. He had learned patience, humility, and the power of love and support. Clara had not only taught him to read, but had helped him rediscover a world beyond the ranch, a world filled with possibility and companionship. The ranch, once a place of loneliness and struggle, was now alive with the laughter, conversation, and partnership of two people learning, growing, and living together. Months passed on the ranch, and life settled into a rhythm that both Samuel and Clara had come to cherish. The mornings were still early, with the sun barely rising over the hills, casting a golden glow across the grazing cattle. The wind carried the scent of fresh grass and hay, and the distant sound of birds filled the quiet spaces between chores. Samuel had grown stronger, not just in body from the constant work, but in spirit. He had learned to read, slowly but steadily, and each word he could recognize on his own brought a quiet sense of triumph. Yet more than letters or words, what mattered most was the connection he shared with Clara. She had become a part of his life in ways he had never imagined possible. Clara, too, had grown accustomed to ranch life. She had learned to milk cows, mend fences, and cook over the wood-burning stove. The work was difficult and sometimes exhausting, but it was meaningful. She could see the results of their labor in the healthy cattle, the flourishing garden, and the neatly maintained house. More importantly, she felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that she had never experienced in her previous life in the city. Life on the ranch was hard, yes, but it was honest, and it allowed her to connect with Samuel in a way that transcended the words on the page. Their mornings often began with small lessons. Clara would sit with Samuel at the wooden table, a notebook between them, and practice reading and writing together. He had progressed beyond single letters and simple words. Now he could read short sentences, recognize common phrases, and even write a few words on his own. Clara encouraged him to read aloud from simple books, pointing to each word patiently as he stumbled over tricky letters. At first he was hesitant, worried about making mistakes, but her encouragement gave him confidence. Each day, Samuel grew more comfortable, and each small success strengthened the trust between them. One day, Samuel held a letter from a distant town, his hands shaking slightly. "I want to try reading this on my own," he said, a quiet determination in his voice. Clara nodded, smiling softly. "Take your time," she said. Samuel took a deep breath and began to read, sounding out each word carefully. At first it was slow, and he hesitated at unfamiliar letters, but he kept going. By the time he finished, Clara clapped gently, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it," she said. Samuel smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest he could not describe. It was not just the accomplishment of reading the letter. It was the realization that he could overcome challenges, that he could grow even at his age, and that he was not alone in the journey. Their bond deepened with every shared moment, not just in learning, but in life itself. They laughed together over small mistakes, like when Samuel tried to spell cabbage and ended up with cabbage, or when Clara mispronounced a ranch term and they both ended up in fits of laughter. They shared stories from their pasts, stories of childhood, family, and dreams that had been set aside. Samuel spoke of the long years of hard work, the loneliness, and the quiet longing he had felt for companionship. Clara shared her hopes for the future, the curiosity she had always carried, and the excitement of discovering a new way of life. In these conversations, they found understanding and acceptance, each learning from the other in ways that went far beyond letters and words. The ranch was not without its challenges. Harsh weather often tested their resolve. One particularly cold winter, the wind howled through the plains, making it nearly impossible to tend the cattle. Snow blanketed the ground, and the paths became treacherous. Samuel worried constantly about their animals, checking fences and water supplies multiple times a day. Clara, despite the cold and the exhaustion, stayed by his side, helping wherever she could. They learned to rely on each other in ways that were practical and emotional. Samuel's ability to read now allowed him to understand letters from suppliers and weather reports, which made their work more effective. Yet, the most important lessons were not on paper. They were in trust, patience, and partnership. During these long days, they found time for small joys. They would take walks across the fields, talking quietly or simply enjoying the silence. They would watch sunsets together, marveling at the way the sky changed colors from gold to pink to deep purple. Sometimes they would sit by the fireplace at night, sharing stories, reading letters, or planning for the future. Samuel had grown to appreciate these moments, realizing that life was about more than survival. It was about connection, love, and shared experiences. Clara, too, found fulfillment in these quiet moments, recognizing that the ranch, for all its hardships, had given her a sense of purpose and belonging. One afternoon, Samuel took Clara to the edge of the ranch where the river curved around a small grove of trees. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the air was filled with the soft rustle of leaves. Samuel handed Clara a notebook and a pencil. "I want to show you something," he said. Clara looked at him curiously. Samuel had been practicing writing letters on his own, and now he wanted to write a message to her. He wrote slowly, carefully forming each letter. When he finished, he handed the notebook to Clara. She read the words aloud and tears filled her eyes. It was a simple note, expressing gratitude, admiration, and affection, but it carried a depth of emotion that neither of them had spoken aloud before. That moment marked a turning point. Their relationship had grown from companionship and learning to genuine love and partnership. As the seasons changed, so did their understanding of each other. Samuel learned that love was not about grand gestures but about patience, respect, and shared effort. Clara learned that true strength was not just physical but also emotional. The ability to stand by someone, to nurture growth, and to accept imperfections. They had both been transformed by their experiences, each learning from the other in ways that would shape the rest of their lives. The ranch continued to thrive. Samuel's reading skills improved further, allowing him to manage correspondence, keep records of cattle, and even write letters to friends and neighbors. Clara's role as teacher evolved into that of a partner, sharing responsibilities and making decisions together. Their days were filled with work, yes, but also with laughter, conversation, and the quiet joy of knowing that they faced life together. They began to dream of the future, not just surviving, but building a life filled with hope, love, and shared accomplishment. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Samuel spoke quietly. "I never imagined my life could be like this," he said. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth and strength of his presence. "Neither did I," she replied softly. "But we have each other, and that makes everything possible." They sat in silence, letting the colors of the sunset and the gentle sounds of the ranch fill the space between them. In that quiet, Samuel felt a deep sense of peace, a feeling that he had found not only a partner but also a new purpose, a new beginning. Their journey was not yet complete. There would be more lessons to learn, more challenges to face, and more opportunities for growth. But Samuel and Clara had discovered something invaluable: the power of love, patience, and partnership. Samuel had learned to read, yes, but he had also learned to trust, to open his heart, and to embrace life with courage. Clara had taught him letters, words, and sentences, but she had also learned about resilience, dedication, and the quiet joys of a life shared with someone who truly cares. As night fell and the stars appeared over the plains, Samuel and Clara sat by the fire, reflecting on how far they had come. The ranch was alive with the results of their work, the home filled with warmth and laughter, and their hearts filled with hope. They knew that the days ahead would continue to bring challenges, but they also knew that together, they could face anything. Every letter read, every word written, and every moment shared had brought them closer, building a foundation of love, respect, and understanding that would last a lifetime. Winter had passed, but the plains still carried the memory of cold winds and frozen nights. Samuel and Clara had grown strong together, facing the harsh weather and long days with determination and patience. The ranch was thriving, and Samuel's ability to read and write had become a powerful tool in their daily life. He could now understand letters from suppliers, manage purchases, and even plan ahead for the seasons. Yet, life on the ranch was never easy. The land could be unforgiving, and the unexpected challenges of nature reminded them daily of how small and fragile life could be. One morning, as Samuel and Clara stepped outside, they noticed that some of the cattle were restless. The animals moved uneasily, as if sensing something unusual. Samuel's heart sank. He knew that bad weather could be approaching. They spent the entire day checking the fences, making sure the water troughs were full and calming the cattle. Despite their careful preparations, a sudden storm arrived that evening. Rain poured down in sheets, wind whipped the trees, and the temperature dropped sharply. The barn, though sturdy, creaked under the pressure of the storm. Samuel and Clara huddled inside, exhausted and worried about the animals, but they faced the storm together. Clara held Samuel's hand tightly, her eyes reflecting both fear and trust. "We'll get through this," she said softly. Samuel nodded, grateful for her strength. He had always been capable in his work, but Clara's presence gave him an added courage he had never known before. Together, they moved among the animals, comforting them, checking on their needs and making sure nothing was left unattended. By the end of the night, soaked and tired, they had managed to keep everything safe. The storm had tested their endurance, but it had also reminded them of the importance of working as a team. Life continued with its daily struggles, yet each challenge brought Samuel and Clara closer. One particularly difficult task came when a neighbor offered to sell a small herd of cattle at a fair price. Samuel knew that buying them could strengthen the ranch, but it meant writing checks and communicating with the town officials, a task that had once terrified him. Now, with Clara by his side, he read through the letters carefully, making sure every word was understood. They worked together to make the arrangements, and for the first time, Samuel felt proud not only of managing the ranch, but also of handling responsibilities that had once been impossible for him. Despite their successes, the work was relentless. Mornings began before sunrise and ended long after the sun had set. Clara and Samuel would rise, feed the animals, check fences, and tend to the crops. The physical demands were exhausting, and sometimes the strain of hard work made their muscles ache. Yet through it all, their determination never wavered. Samuel noticed how Clara adapted to each task, learning quickly and showing a resilience that impressed him daily. Clara, in turn, admired Samuel's knowledge of the land, his skill with the cattle, and the quiet patience he showed in every situation. They had become partners in every sense of the word, relying on each other not only for practical work, but also for emotional support. One evening, after a particularly long day, Samuel and Clara sat by the fireplace, their hands still sore from the work. Samuel opened a letter he had received from a distant supplier. The words no longer intimidated him. He read aloud carefully, making sure he understood every detail. Clara watched with pride, realizing how far he had come. "You've grown so much," she said, her voice warm. Samuel smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. It was more than just reading. It was about confidence, independence, and the ability to face challenges head-on. The harsh realities of ranch life continued to test them. One spring, a sudden illness spread among some of the cattle. Samuel's heart sank as he examined the sick animals, worried that they might lose part of the herd. He and Clara worked tirelessly, preparing remedies, calling veterinarians, and spending sleepless nights ensuring that each animal received the care it needed. The days were long and filled with worry, but their teamwork and dedication began to show results. Slowly, the cattle recovered, and Samuel realized that Clara's presence had been essential in overcoming this crisis. They celebrated quietly, knowing that their combined effort had saved the animals and strengthened their bond. In addition to the practical challenges, there were also emotional moments that tested their resilience. Samuel sometimes struggled with frustration or self-doubt, especially when facing difficult tasks or setbacks. Clara's patience and encouragement helped him navigate these feelings. She reminded him that progress took time and that every small effort mattered. Samuel, in turn, learned to accept help, to trust another person fully, and to see that vulnerability was not weakness but strength. Through these experiences, they discovered the true meaning of partnership, supporting each other through both hardships and successes. As the year progressed, the ranch began to prosper in ways that neither of them could have imagined when they first met. Samuel's reading allowed him to keep detailed records of the cattle, plan for seasonal changes, and communicate effectively with suppliers. Clara contributed not only by managing daily tasks, but also by offering ideas, solutions, and support. Together, they transformed the ranch into a well-organized, thriving operation. More importantly, they had built a home filled with love, respect, and trust. Every letter Samuel read, every note Clara wrote, and every task they completed side by side had strengthened their connection and enriched their lives. One particularly quiet evening, Samuel and Clara sat outside, watching the sunset over the rolling plains. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of nature. Samuel held Clara's hand, feeling the warmth and security of her presence. "I never thought life could be like this," he said quietly. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, smiling softly. "We've faced so much together," she replied, "and we've grown stronger because of it." In that moment, Samuel realized that the trials they had endured were not burdens, they were opportunities. Every storm, every illness, and every long day of work had shaped their lives, strengthened their bond, and taught them resilience. Their relationship had evolved beyond companionship. It was built on mutual respect, trust, and shared responsibility. Samuel had learned that accepting help did not diminish his strength, it enhanced it. Clara had learned that perseverance and patience could overcome even the harshest challenges. Together they faced life with courage, knowing that whatever difficulties lay ahead, they would face them as a team. The ranch, once a place of isolation, had become a symbol of their growth, love, and resilience. The seasons continued to change, bringing new challenges and opportunities. Samuel and Clara learned to anticipate the needs of the ranch, prepare for storms, and manage their resources wisely. They celebrated small victories together, from a successful harvest to the birth of a healthy calf. Each success was a reminder of their combined effort and the strength of their partnership. They also took time to enjoy quiet moments, walking through the fields, watching the stars, or simply sitting together by the fire, reflecting on how far they had come. Through all these trials, Samuel's ability to read continued to grow. He could now handle correspondence with ease, read important notices, and even write letters to friends and neighbors. Reading had become more than a skill. It was a gateway to independence, understanding, and connection. Clara had been the catalyst for this change, but Samuel's determination and effort had made it real. Their story was no longer just about a man learning to read or a woman teaching him. It was about the strength that comes from facing challenges together, the growth that comes from patience, and the love that develops when two people support each other through life's hardships. By the end of the year, Samuel and Clara had not only survived the trials of the ranch but had thrived. The land was productive, the cattle were healthy, and their home was filled with warmth and laughter. More importantly, their bond had deepened, rooted in shared experience, mutual respect, and enduring love. Every storm, every illness, and every difficult day had brought them closer, teaching lessons that no book or letter could fully convey. They had learned that resilience was not just about surviving, it was about facing life with courage, embracing challenges, and supporting one another through every trial. As night fell over the plains, Samuel and Clara sat by the fire, reflecting on their journey. The ranch, once a symbol of solitude and struggle, was now a testament to their growth and perseverance. They had faced countless challenges, yet they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. Samuel realized that the greatest lessons were not found in letters or books alone, but in the shared experiences, the hard work, and the unwavering support of someone who believed in him. Clara understood that love and resilience were intertwined, and that true partnership meant standing together, no matter what life threw their way. Spring arrived on the plains with a gentle warmth, melting the last traces of winter snow and filling the air with the fresh scent of new growth. Samuel and Clara had endured so many hardships together, yet their bond had grown stronger with each passing day. The ranch was thriving, the cattle were healthy, the fences sturdy, and the garden flourishing. Samuel had reached a level of literacy that he had once believed impossible. He could read letters from townsfolk, write notes to friends, and even manage his own accounts. But more than these accomplishments, he had gained confidence, independence, and a deep, unwavering love for Clara. One morning, Samuel woke before the sun, as was his habit, and stepped outside to check on the cattle. The plain stretched endlessly, golden in the early light, and he felt a quiet pride in the life he had built. Clara joined him, carrying a basket of eggs from the henhouse. She moved with ease, her hands skilled from months of hard work, and her smile brightened the chilly morning. "Good morning," she said softly, placing the basket on the table. Samuel smiled in return, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the sun. Life was full of routine, but it was no longer lonely. Together, they had created a home and a life that was rich in connection, purpose, and shared effort. After breakfast, they sat down with a stack of letters from neighboring towns and suppliers. Samuel picked up one letter and read it aloud, carefully pronouncing each word. Clara listened, nodding and occasionally correcting him when needed, but mostly just enjoying hearing his voice. Samuel had come so far since the day Clara had first arrived on the ranch, teaching him the alphabet letter by letter. Now, reading had become a joy, a way to connect not only with the wider world but with each other. Clara had taught him to read, but he had also taught himself patience, persistence, and the courage to grow. Their teamwork, once limited to ranch chores, now extended to understanding and navigating life together. The days passed in a rhythm of work and quiet celebration. They fed the animals, tended the garden, repaired fences, and maintained the barn. Samuel kept detailed records of the cattle and the land, ensuring that the ranch ran smoothly. Clara assisted in planning, problem-solving, and managing daily tasks, her skills and insight becoming invaluable. They often shared a quiet moment on the porch in the evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange. It was in these moments that Samuel reflected on how far he had come, from a lonely rancher who could not read to a man who had learned, grown, and discovered the deep meaning of partnership and love. One afternoon, a neighboring rancher came by with an invitation to a small community gathering in the town. Samuel hesitated, unsure of how he would interact with people outside the ranch, but Clara gently encouraged him. "You've come so far," she said. "This is just another way to show what you can do." Samuel agreed, and together they prepared for the trip. Samuel read the invitation carefully, making sure he understood the time, location, and purpose of the gathering. For the first time, reading was no longer intimidating, it was empowering. Clara smiled as she watched him, proud of his growth and determination. At the gathering, Samuel and Clara were welcomed warmly. Neighbors complimented the success of the ranch, the healthy cattle, and the beautiful garden. Samuel answered questions confidently, reading notes and letters with ease. Clara noticed how he stood taller, spoke with certainty, and met others' eyes without hesitation. The pride she felt in him was immense, but so was his pride in himself. For years, Samuel had felt isolated, unsure of his abilities and fearful of judgment. Now he realized that education, patience, and love had transformed him into a man who could face the world with confidence. Back at the ranch, they continued to build their life together. Samuel wrote letters to friends and family, sharing stories of the ranch, the animals, and his newfound skills. Clara helped when needed, but Samuel now took the lead, reading and writing on his own. Each letter sent and received was a reminder of how much he had grown, both practically and emotionally. He had learned that challenges could be overcome, that knowledge could be gained at any age, and that love and support made even the most difficult tasks possible. Their bond deepened further as they celebrated small milestones together. The birth of a new calf, a particularly successful harvest, or even a well-written letter became reasons to share joy. Samuel would often look at Clara, seeing not only the woman who had taught him to read, but also the partner who had stood by him through every hardship. Clara, in turn, saw Samuel not just as a student but as an equal, a man who had worked tirelessly to grow, learn, and nurture their life together. Their relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect, admiration, and love, a true partnership built on years of shared experience. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, Samuel took Clara's hand in his. He led her to a quiet spot near the river, where the water sparkled in the fading light. "Clara," he said softly, "I want you to know how much you've changed my life. You taught me to read, yes, but you've given me so much more than that. You've given me hope, courage, and love." Clara's eyes glistened with tears, and she pressed her hand to his cheek. "Samuel, you've given me so much too," she replied. "You've shown me strength, patience, and the joy of building a life with someone you truly trust. We've grown together, and I couldn't imagine life any other way." They embraced, the river flowing gently behind them, a symbol of the steady, enduring current of their partnership. As the years went by, Samuel and Clara continued to thrive on the ranch. They welcomed friends from the town, shared stories of their journey, and even helped others in need, offering guidance and support. Samuel became known not just as a hardworking rancher, but as a man who had overcome great personal challenges, inspiring others with his determination and growth. Clara's influence extended beyond teaching him to read. She had brought compassion, wisdom, and energy to the ranch, making it a home filled with warmth and life. They often reflected on their journey together, remembering the early days when Samuel had been shy, reserved, and fearful of his own limitations. They laughed at the mistakes, celebrated the small victories, and cherished the quiet moments. The ranch, once a place of solitude and struggle, had become a symbol of resilience, growth, and love. Samuel and Clara knew that the hardships they had faced were stepping stones to a life richer and more meaningful than they could have imagined. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sharing letters from friends, reading books, or simply enjoying each other's company. Samuel had grown into a confident reader, capable of understanding complex ideas and expressing himself through writing. Clara had become more than a teacher. She was a partner, a friend, and a source of unwavering support. Together, they had transformed not only the ranch but their own lives, proving that love, patience, and perseverance could overcome even the greatest obstacles. As twilight settled over the plains, Samuel looked out over the land, thinking of how far he had come. From a lonely, illiterate rancher, he had grown into a man capable of learning, loving, and thriving. Clara had been the spark, the guiding light, but his own determination and courage had carried him forward. The ranch stood as a testament to their efforts, a living symbol of the power of partnership, education, and shared dreams. Finally, Samuel and Clara understood that their journey had not been about letters alone, nor solely about survival on the ranch. It had been about learning to trust, to love, and to support one another through life's trials and triumphs. Every letter read, every task completed, and every moment of patience had brought them closer, building a foundation that would last a lifetime. As the stars appeared in the night sky, they held hands and smiled, knowing that together they could face anything. The plain stretched before them, wide and full of promise, just like their life together. A life filled with love, hope, and endless possibility.